Okay, so let's talk about the term socialist economy. You hear it thrown around all the time, right? On the news, in political debates, but what does it actually mean? We hear the phrase constantly, but pinning down a clear, simple definition can be surprisingly tricky. So in this explainer, we're going to cut through all that noise and focus on one very specific, very foundational definition.
So let's just dive right in. The big question on the table, what is a socialist economy? Well, according to the specific source we're digging into today, the answer is actually pretty simple, but wow, is it sweeping.
And there it is, a system where everything is under the control of the government. That's the core idea. I mean, it's a super broad definition, isn't it? Just one sentence that covers, well, literally everything. So you gotta ask, what does everything actually cover?
Exactly. Let's break that down. What does this idea of complete government control really look like in practice?
And that word total is so important here. We're not just talking about the government regulating, a few key industries like energy or healthcare. Nope. According to this definition, we're talking about control over every single thing. Just think about your day-to-day life for a second. The food you eat, the clothes on your back, the car you might drive, the home you live in. In a system like this, the government is the one calling all the shots on all of it.
So how does that work? Well, this idea of total control really comes down to two main things. First, the government gets to decide what gets produced. We're talking every single good and every single service. And second, it decides the price for all of that stuff. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch. The state controls not just what's available, but also what it's worth.
Okay, so think about that for a minute. If the government is in charge of making everything and setting the price for everything, it brings up a pretty big and pretty logical question, right? Where does that leave private businesses? What's their role?
Well, the answer, based on this definition, is pretty blunt. There isn't one. The source is crystal clear on this. In this system, there is no role for the private sector. And it's so important to get what that means. This isn't a case of, high taxes or a bunch of tough regulations on companies. We're talking about the private sector just not existing at all in the economy.
And that right there is really the key difference, the big dividing line that this definition draws. I mean, think about most other economic systems out there. They usually have some kind of mix, right? You've got a public sector and a private sector, and they operate side by side. Maybe they even compete a little. But in the system we're talking about today, that entire private part of the economy, it's just gone.
Okay, so let's recap the big takeaways here, because they really build on each other. Number one, the government controls everything that gets made. Number two, the government sets the price for all of it. And number three, which is the direct result of the first two, the private sector is completely out of the picture, gone.
When you really dig into this idea of a completely state-controlled economy, it leads you to a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond just dollars and cents. And it's this: if one single entity, the government, controls absolutely everything, who holds that government accountable? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.